Over the last few weeks, we've been hearing from the Gospel of Luke, primarily hearing stories where Jesus has healed or raised people from the dead, miraculous stories of the way in which Jesus was transforming both individuals and the witnesses thereof as well, in profound and powerful ways. Today we hear another of these miraculous stories of Jesus healing someone who was, quote, possessed by a demon, whatever that meant. It could have meant someone who was struggling with mental health issues, might have been schizophrenic, might have had bipolar, might have been otherwise different than the norm, the cultural norm of the day. And not only does Jesus transform this particular man and heal him, Jesus has been spending time in the relative comfort of Galilee, a place where he was at home and welcomed and known, and where he was kind of preaching to the choir a little bit. And in this case, he moves to a north of Galilee, to a southern tip of what is now Lebanon, to amongst the Gerasenes. And these are people, this was an area of hostile territory, so to speak, in that these people were Gentiles, and the Gentiles and Jews never intermingled or intertwined. As a matter of fact, if you hung out with Gentiles, you yourself would be, quote, unclean and marginalized from your own community. So it was people were very careful about with whom they associated. But not only did Jesus move into hostile territory in an area where he would be perceived as being unclean, he also was dealing with a person who was not of his own right mind. And that, again, would have created a sense of Jesus being ostracized and marginalized from his community. And the third thing he did is he did so in a graveyard, amongst the tombs. And that, again, was a place where people did not venture, because you, again, would be unclean and ostracized. So 3 strikes and you're out. But it didn't matter to Jesus, because it wasn't about that. He didn't care. Jesus cared about the healing and the transformation of another human soul. And so he was breaking again down the norms of the societal structure of the day. That he was basically saying then, these rules that you live by are no longer appropriate and don't really matter. And after he had completed this miraculous healing of this man called Legion, which, as an aside, is a bit of a side testimony, because this person became known as Legion, as many, because he no longer had a name. He was no longer a person, he was other than. So he was Legion. And as such, it represents, again, the way in which marginalized people are treated in civilized society of the day. But Jesus did this miraculous healing and did so in this dramatic way, and the demons ran into a herd of swine, and the swine ran into the ocean and all drowned. And the people who witnessed it were fearful. They were frightened, of course. Scared the bejeebies out of you to see something like this occur. But I think even more to the point, it might have been that they were witnessing something so extraordinarily unusual. They didn't know what to make of it. They didn't know what to make of it. Jesus breaking down all these barriers and doing all this stuff that you're not supposed to do, and becoming unclean, and they just didn't were confused about what this actually meant. And the man wanted to follow, and then Jesus just said to him, go to your home and just say to people, God's done a great deal for you. God has done a great deal for you. That is all that is important. Who did it, where it happened, how it happened, doesn't matter. It just matters about how God has done great to you and good to you. That's what matters. Transformation of an individual, transformation of a people, transformation of a society, breaking down those barriers. And that is one of the things the church has struggled with throughout the course of Christian history, is trying to interpret the way in which we hear the gospel in the context of the day in which we live. Throughout the course of history, there has been debate and fights and division and schism all over the way we interpret Scripture, the way we hear the doctrine and the laws of the church, and how it informs us, both to the good and to the ill. Sometimes I think more so to the ill often. That we try as a people, as a Christian people, to find a gospel message that is inclusive, offering the love of Jesus, but by interpreting it in a particular kind of way, what we ultimately do is marginalize, separate, and divide. There was a time, not too many centuries ago, where the church was, in fact, a proponent of slavery. Because nowhere in the Gospels is slavery ultimately condemned. And this was the position that the church took. Because Jesus didn't come out and condemn slavery, that somehow that meant slavery was okay. And in fact, there are passages, in particular the book of Philemon. Anybody heard of the book of Philemon? The very end of the Bible. Single page, single letter. Where it talks about the way in which you should treat your slave. Lovingly, as a person. Which affirms the capacity of it's okay to somehow have a slave in your community and family. And as we know, over the course of history, in the 16th and 17th century, the church had to change. It did change the way it perceived, the way human beings treated one another in regards to slavery. One of the largest issues the church has faced over the last numbers of centuries. In our recent days, in our lifetime, the church has struggled with the role of birth control. In the 30s and the 40s in the Anglican Church, that the birth control, as the Roman Catholic Church has espoused it, diminishes the capacity of the miraculous efforts of life. We have changed the way we perceive that. We have changed as a church the way we perceive marriage, in that up until 1969, the Anglican Church did not affirm marriage of a divorced person. Because they felt that marriage was a sacrament of God, an outward visible symbol of God, and by divorcing we somehow broke the sacrament, and thereby would not accept divorced people into our church. Fortunately, the church began to reinterpret and rethink the way in which we hear the sacrament of marriage as a gift of God in the midst of those of us as fallible people, and that the spiritual covenant that is created in marriage sometimes ends. And then pastorally, we need to embrace and uphold those people that suffer the pain and the heartache of the end of a relationship. So we embrace people who have been through separation and divorce and say, we have a place here. And God forgives us, empowers us, and moves us forward in a manner that is meant for those of us who sometimes stumble and fall. We've changed that role. We are being transformed through the communion of saints over the course of history. And I believe that today is a moment of reckoning for us as a church and for our people. Today is the events that occurred last week in Orlando is a moment of reckoning about our common assumptions of sexuality in the church. We have faced again the presence of evil and the horror of this violence. And I have to say that I was absolutely thunderstruck, not by the events of what happened, but the way that I responded emotionally. I was numb. I wasn't in the moment outraged. I didn't stand in awe and shock to think this has happened. I have been somehow numbed to this capacity of us here in North America to beget violence again upon one another. And in this particular case, a targeted group of people, LGBTQ people, at this nightclub where they'd gone to party and have fun and dance and be free. And then following that, this incredible, ugly specter of homophobia and Islamophobia, and the whole anti-immigration rhetoric that I began to hear in the political sphere, not only in the United States, but also here in Canada, to people that I was talking. And the percolation of further prejudice against and fear of those who do not fit in the way we think they need to fit in. They don't fit into a nice, neat little box that is comfortable for us. And this position, the position of homosexuality as a sin, is a position that the church has espoused for decades and decades. I'm happy to say that there is movement and there is a change that has been occurring. There is a transformation that is happening, but we still have a long way to go. There are those colleagues within my own realm, brothers and sisters within the Anglican community, who do not support or recognize that people who are LGBTQ are just the same as us and maybe born differently than us, and they espouse the expression that they hate the sin and not the sinner. But that in and of itself marginalizes, separates, and creates a sense of us and them as well. It's okay, I believe. We have within ourselves the human right to share a variety of feelings and opinions, and the capacity to debate and to talk and to question and to try to challenge ourselves and others in these issues. But I honestly believe that as an institution, as a church, we have a responsibility now, with the power and influence that we have, to begin to dispel and recognize that all people are made in God's image, and that homophobia has no place or role within the community of Christ that we call the church. There was an article written just this past week by an Episcopalian. I just want to offer a quote from her. She said that any religious teaching that denigrates their personhood or the expression of their personhood as inherently sinful provides a divinely sanctioned rationale for intolerance and hate. Moreover, they create the very thing they claim to be overcoming, creating a hierarchy, a two-tiered humanity of those kind of people versus these kind of people. Those people are still understood as different, suspect, and less in the image of God than these people. They feed the stream of contempt and disdain, fear and judgment, in which some people are identified as better or more in the image of God than others. And we have seen the consequences of this kind of doctrine and teaching. Within our church presently, I have mentioned, we are engaged in a debate about the role of the church when it comes to marrying same-sex couples. In 3 weeks, our church is going to vote on this position. We believe across the Canadian church that we have enough votes within the House of Clergy that will pass. We have enough votes within the House of Laity for it to pass. But we are fearful that we do not have enough votes within the House of Bishops for it to pass. There has been an extraordinary amount of pressure and dialogue and rhetoric going on amongst the people across our country, trying to ensure that the people of the bishops are hearing the voice of the church, to ensure that all human beings, regardless of sexuality, have a role and place within our church. So over the next week or two, I ask that you offer prayers for our church and for our bishops as we continue to move to an open, inclusive, and progressive community where all are welcome, regardless of who we are, what we are, and where we come from. Jesus is calling us to transformation. This is our moment of reckoning. Thanks be to God. Amen.